So we're in Matthew chapter 25, and the title is Two Parables, the Signs of the Second Coming of Christ. So we began in Matthew 23, Matthew 24. Christ is leaving the temple on the mount. He's going he's leaving the Temple Mount. He's crossed out of Jerusalem. He's gone up the Mount of Olives, and he sat down and he began to teach there. And so Jesus, as he's sitting there, as he's coming out rather, he foretold the destruction of Jerusalem. He foretold the destruction of the temple. And as we've studied last Sunday, the disciples began to ask questions. They wanted to know when. When are all these things going to happen? And so in Matthew 24 verse 3, and as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him saying, or privately saying, tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? Well, on Sunday, we went through, in the Sunday school hour and then in the morning hour, we went through this expectation of the Lord coming. And the Lord didn't tell them a time, but he gave them a series of signs. These are the signs of his coming. But he also warned, and I'm not going to go back and review that. He also warned, though, Matthew 24, verses 42 and verse 44, watch ye therefore, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. Now, who remembers what was the metaphor or the illustration the Lord gave about how his coming would be suddenly? Do you remember? He used what? A thief. So he used how a thief comes in the night. You're not looking for him. You're not expecting him. He comes suddenly, and you're taken by surprise. And so Matthew 24 and verse 43 talks about the thief. And then verse 44, therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not, the Son of Man cometh. That brings us to Matthew 25. And I wanted tonight to look at two parables, the two parables that are found there, because the Lord begins to teach in parables again to his disciples. And so I believe this is on your outline. So Jesus then foretold in two parables the need of being watchful and the need of being ready for his second coming. And I do not have all the verses written out, so I'm going to invite you. You have your Bible. Look with me, and we're going to read Matthew 25, and we're going to read all the way through 1 through verse 30. So I want to invite you to do that. We're going to begin with, first of all, the parable of the 10 virgins. So let me read. You follow as I read. So we're in Matthew 25, verse 1. Then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps and went forth to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. They that were foolish took their lamps, and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose, and they trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said unto the wise, Give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. But the wise answered, saying, Not so, lest there be not enough for us and you, but go ye rather to them that sell, and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. Afterwards came also the other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open unto us. But he answered and said, Verily, I say unto you, I know you not. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. Now I'm going to keep reading because I am hoping to cover this next part. Now, he gives a second parable. And this is a parable about the talents. You would recognize it from that. For the kingdom of heaven, in verse 14, is as a man traveling into a far country, who called his own servants, and he delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, to another he gave 2, and to another 1, to every man according to his several or his individual ability, and straightway took his journey. Then he that had received the 5 talents went and traded with the same, and made them other 5 talents. Likewise he that had received 2, he also gained other 2. But he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth, and he hid his Lord's money. Now after a long time the Lord of those servants cometh, and he reckoneth with them. And so he that had received 5 talents came, and he brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Behold, I have gained beside them 5 talents more. His Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. And he also that had received 2 talents came, and he said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Behold, I have gained 2 other talents besides them. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Then he which had received the 1 talent came, and he said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, gathering where thou hast not strawed. And I was afraid, and I went, and I hid thy talent in the earth, and lo, there thou hast that is thine. Well, his Lord answered, and he said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sow not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. That is, with interest. Take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. Cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Let's break it down. 2 parables. So here's the first parable, and it is the parable of 10 virgins. Now, I'm not going to try to make an analogy out of this so that every little nuance of the parable has a meaning. That's not going to be my purpose tonight. But I do want to set the stage for it. So here's the setting. What is the Lord teaching about? He is teaching about His second coming. We're not talking about the rapture. We're talking about the second coming. Now, with the second coming, we're going to see in both of the parables that we studied tonight that there will be some who are ready, looking for His coming, and then there's going to be others who are not. So let me go through it. So let's look at the parable of the virgins. All right? Begins with this. It's a reminder of the sudden, unexpected return of Jesus Christ. Now, the 10 virgins were getting ready for what in the story? They're getting ready for a wedding, okay? And so we know that with a wedding, there would have been an agreement between fathers. We would call it an engagement. But then there would have been the betrothal. Now, the betrothal would have, in a real sense, been a marriage license. Even though the man and the woman would not have consummated the marriage for days, weeks, months, maybe as much as a year. And so the setting is this then. There is a groom. The groom has been away preparing a home for his bride. Now, the bride has accompanied her 10 virgins. Now, the groom in this story is a type of whom? A type of Christ. So it is a story about the second coming of Christ. And so, in the story, the groom, Christ, speaking of himself, has been away. Now he's teaching his disciples, I'm going away, but I'm coming again. The disciples are having to learn through the parable that though he is coming, his coming is not going to be soon. And yet, in the book of Acts, chapter 1, which I have written the devotional tomorrow, even in Acts chapter 1, the disciples come to the Lord right before he ascends to heaven, and they say, are you now going to start your kingdom? Are you going to set up your kingdom? And they forgot all about the stories of him saying, I'm going away, I'm coming again. But the parables that we're studying is that he's going away for a time. With the groom in the parable, a groom would be away preparing a home for his bride. Often, the groom's home would have been an addition to the parents' house. So, if you were a bride and you're getting married, there's a good chance you're going to live with your father-in-law and mother-in-law. And I'm sure that always worked out wonderfully for everybody. But that's what was happening. Now, in the story, the groom has been away, but the bride now has her bridesmaids. There are 10 of them. They are, under Jewish tradition, they are virgins. The betrothal period has gone for, we don't know how long, but for a time. Long enough that the 10 virgins who were waiting for the groom to come, in the story, they all 10 fall asleep. Now, going through the story here, the groomsman was Christ, and the 10 bridesmaids were virgins. All profess in this story to be believers. They're looking for Christ's coming. They're looking and they're waiting. I would say to you, this is my interpretation, in both the parable of the virgins and the parable of the talents, that each of those is illustrating some who are believers and some who are professed believers. And so it is in this study here. Now, another thought then that goes with that. With the 10 virgins, they're invited to the wedding. And they're waiting. Outwardly, they all look the same. They're 10 virgins. Each of the 10 virgins have a lamp. That lamp has a wick in it. And the difference, though, is that 5 of the virgins are wise and 5 are foolish. Somebody tell me, what's the difference in the wise and the foolish here? Huh? Some have oil, some don't have oil. I grew up with lanterns. I don't know, did any of you have lanterns growing up? Okay. The hillbilly girl does back here, right? So when I was growing up, I had a little lantern, and it had oil in it. If you did not have oil in the lantern, how fast would it take to burn up the wick? Really fast, right? But by having the wick in oil, it would burn brightly, pulling the oil. As it was burning, it would pull the oil. I think all of a sudden I just became alive. So anyway, let me go on. Here's another thought then. The bridegroom then, he delayed his coming. And this was a teaching of the Lord that his coming too was going to be delayed. Now, at this point, the disciples did not understand what he was teaching them. Later, they would look back on the parable and they would understand. Thirdly, another thought then, let me go through a little bit of that. So at midnight, there was a cry made, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet them." And then all those virgins arose and they trimmed their lamps. Trimming their lamps, they're doing what? They're cutting off the burnt area from on the wick so that it's nice and fresh and it's going to burn the oil. Well, there was a problem though. 5 of the virgins had oil and 5 did not have oil. So the foolish virgins realized they didn't have oil for the lamp, and so they immediately did what? They turned to the ones that did and they said, "Give us oil for our lamps." Now, moving forward, here we go. "And the foolish said unto the wise, Give us oil." Verse 9, "But the wise answer saith, No, not so, lest there not be enough for us. Go rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves." Go to somebody that sells oil, get your own oil, and then come back. But the problem with the story is that before they came back, the bridegroom had already come. The bridegroom came, the 5 virgins that had oil in their lamp go with the bride and the bridegroom. And then when those who had gone to purchase oil, when they come to the wedding feast, they knock on the door. And the groom says, I don't know you. And they were too late. In the story, the oil represents God's saving grace. Those that had the oil knew the grace of God. Those that did not were not prepared for His coming. Anybody thoughts on that before I move on? Here's the lesson. It was very simple. He answered and he said, Verily I say unto you, I know you not. Now here's the application. Watch. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour wherein the Son of Man cometh. Remember, the disciples were always asking, when? And the Lord says, you're not going to know the day and you're not going to know the hour. And so what are you supposed to do? Watch with anticipation for the coming. 5, so we have 10 who were virgins, 5 who were prepared with the saving grace of God's oil in their lamps, in their souls, but 5 who were unprepared. And by being unprepared, they were foolish. Anybody thoughts or application? Because I'm just kind of writing through this in the next 15 minutes for the next one. Anyone? No? They're very simple, really, aren't they? Here's another. The parable of the talents. Be working in anticipation of Christ's second coming. So we've already gone through and we've read. So we have a master. And this master, again, is a type or a symbol of the Lord. Now, he is, in the story, the master is going away. Again, what is the Lord teaching? He said, I'm going away. But this one has a different application. It has 2 servants who are wise and 1 servant who is foolish. Let's walk through it real fast. So, the illustration, first of all, let's look at it. I'm going to go back to the scriptures for this. So let's look at the master's trust in verse 14 and verse 15. For the kingdom of heaven is a man traveling into a far country, a foreign country, who called his own servants, who are basically overseers or stewards or managers of his household. And we read that he delivered unto them his goods. In other words, all of his property. Everything that he owned was entrusted to the 3 servants. Now, the question would be, what is a talent? A talent basically is a weight, a measure. So a talent could be a measure of gold. It could be a measure of silver. Obviously, there's a difference in the value of the 2. Some commentators will write that the value of a talent of gold would have been equal to 20 years' wages. Now think about that for a minute. 20 years' wages. So the servant that was given 5 talents of gold would have been entrusted with how many years' wages, if that were the case? 100 years' wages. So an enormous sum. Then there was the other servant who was entrusted with 2. And there again, an enormous sum. And then the third one entrusted with 1. But each of them were entrusted with a large sum. Now, the question then of the trust here is, how was it decided who would get 5, who would get 2, and who would get 1? So let's look at that. So we've got the master's trust. Look at the servant's assignments, if you would, verses 15 through 18. So in verse 15, he gave 1 5 talents, he gave another 2, and then he gave another 1. Now he gave to every man according to his what? His several ability, his individual ability. So the master knew his servants. He knew the ones that had the skill and the capability of 5, being trusted with 5, another with 2, and another with 1. But he knew his servants. So he is going away, and we read he entrusted them, each one, with the amount that he knew they were capable of handling. Now we read then straightway he took his journey. Now they don't know when he's coming back. And if you go back, if you look at old days, back even in this time period, or even in the medieval ages, Middle Ages, it was not unusual for a very wealthy landowner to be gone for years. In fact, there were times where kings would go to war, and they would be gone for years. And so in those years that they were gone, they had these servants, these kind of servants that are watching the household. Now, they didn't know when the master's going to come back. Is it going to be months? Is it going to be years? When is he going to come back? And the story here is they did not know. They did not know. For the disciples, they're being taught the Lord is going away, but he's coming again. Let's keep going. So we've got the servant's assignment. And then the third one, I want you to look at the master's homecoming. So I'm going to go back through it just a little bit and pick it up at verse 16. The man with 5 talents went out and invested it. Now let's declare what a talent is here for us. A talent could be a measure of money, but it could also be a measure of opportunity. It could be time. It could be skills. It could be talents. It is the trust of the master. So we have the one with 5 that goes out, and he was diligent, and he doubled the trust of the master. We have one that had 2. He went out and he doubled the trust of the master. And then finally we've got the one that we'll see that is called the wicked servant. And in verse 18, he that had received 1 went and digged in the earth, and he hid his Lord's money. So we could say he put it in a safety deposit box, right? Dug a hole, put it in the ground, buried it. And he just said, when my master comes, I'm going to give him the talent back. So, while the others are working, what is the servant with 1 talent doing? Nothing. Nothing at all. Now, let's keep going. And so in verse 19 then, after a long time, the Lord of those servants cometh, and he reckoneth with them. He began to take an account. Verse 20, we've already talked about the 5 talents. He brought 5 more. And look at the commendation in verse 21. And his Lord said unto him, Well done, thou good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. Now the one with 2 talents, verse 22. He was given 2 talents. He invested it. He brought 2 talents more. And the Lord, in verse 23, what does he do? He gives him exactly the same commendation. No difference. So each one was commended based on not only their ability, but their investment of their abilities, right? And then we come to the one that went and he buried his talent. Let's pick him up at verse 24. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and he said, now let's analyze this. Some of you know this passage well. So let's start talking about this servant for a moment, okay? First of all, let's talk about the servant's attitude. What's the servant's attitude towards the master? Huh? He insults him. He charges the master with being what? Unfair, hard, difficult. So let's look at it for a moment. I knew that thou art a hard man. So there's a criticism, right? And then reaping where thou hast not sown, there's an accusation. And gathering where thou hast not strawed. So he charges basically the master with being a thief. You take what's not yours. Now, as the owner of, let's say, a vineyard, let's say these men, one invested in a vineyard, there would be the harvest of the vineyard, and the master would get his share. The accusation here is that he's unfair, he's unjust. So then look at verse 25. In verse 25, he says, "And I was afraid, and I went and hid thy talents in the earth, and lo, that there thou hast, that is thine." Now here's the question. Was he afraid? What was he afraid of? Were the others afraid of the master?
This guy didn't know the master very well, and he was afraid of his own lack of performance, not the fear that would really be there against his master.
I agree. I'm going to try to take what Jim said and make a sum of it. The one with 5 talents, the one with 2 talents, knew the master. And he knew the master would take an account. And he knew what the master's expectations were. The one with 1 talent did not have a love for the master. His concept of who the master was that the master is unloving, he's harsh, he's difficult. And so rather than honor the master with the talent, the gifts, the abilities, the opportunities that he had, he dishonored the master and refrained to serve him. Did I sum it up? And somebody else, another idea? Here's the question. The ones with 5 talents who doubled it, and the one with 2 talents who doubled it, would there have been a fear on their part of their motivation, or no?
I think it was motivated because they knew their master's generosity.
You knew the master's generosity. I think the fear would have been a fear of disapproval, of not being found faithful. So in other words, you can have a fear that is terror, or you can have a fear that motivates us to honor the master. My dad's still alive. He's turns 91 this year, right? Okay. And so I don't fear my dad as I did when I was a child. But I would fear my dad in the sense of not being approved by him or disappointing him. Maybe that's what I'm looking at. Do you realize each one of us that are believers here, we all have a day of accounting, don't you? We all have a day of accounting. And I think sometimes as believers, we take too lightly the fact that we will all stand before God and we will give an account. And our works will be judged, whether it's gold and silver and precious stones, or it's wood, hay, and stubble. And so we'd ask in our lives, how much of your life is wood, hay, and stubble? How much of you look back on life and you don't get a rewind button? Remember the old VCRs? We don't have that. So we don't get a rewind on life. But how many of us sitting in the auditorium today wish that we could go back and have a second run at that? Now we can't. And I know that God is loving and God is forgiving. I understand that. But I think that we too often don't recognize that there is an accounting. Not of just what we've done, but of our motives and why we did it. And so this foolish man buries what God gave him. He said, well, it's not fair. He had 5 and he had 2 and all I get is 1. Well, if that's all I'm going to get, then I'm not going to do anything. Right? there was a day of accounting. Each one of them gave an account. There is a day that we will give an account to the Lord. Now, let's go back. The context here is the second coming of Christ. There will be those who come to know the Lord during the tribulation period. There will be some that are looking and living in anticipation of the Lord's coming. And there will be others that will be like the 5 foolish virgins that waited too late. But the same application can be made about the rapture and us not working and living and anticipating the Lord's coming. And so the Master's homecoming, I want to fill this in. I only got a couple of minutes. The Master's homecoming was a picture of Christ's second coming when he comes to judge the world at the end of the Great Tribulation. Here's the interpretation. The faithful will be judged and rewarding according to their works. The faithless, the lost sinners, the one that went and buried his talent, will give an account of their lives. And as you read in verse 30 of Matthew 25, and we read, "And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And I'm going to close with that. I'm thinking about Sunday morning, picking up the story about the sheep and the goats and the separation that will occur there. Any of you comments as I close tonight? I knew this was simple parables and we teach it to our kids, but sometimes I don't think that we really grasp the gravity of God's judgment. Anybody? Let's close tonight in prayer for North Florida and Georgia, and South Carolina, North Carolina, East Tennessee. And I heard today a report that even all the way up into Virginia, I haven't seen that, was parts of Virginia devastated as well. So I've, and Sheila and I, as we've prayed, we've just tried to wrap our thoughts around losing everything, not knowing how to begin to rebuild. But then add on that your jobs are lost because the businesses are gone. I thought about Christian school teachers and teaching some of them in their schools, and suddenly the schools are gone. And then for some, unless they have insurance on it, automobiles that they have a loan on. And the banks are probably still going to want that loan paid off. And you say, well, I don't have, it was lost. And so you think about the big semi-trucks and all that I saw in the flood waters. And there's going to be a poverty, I think, through that whole region. I was reading most homeowners did not have flood insurance. And so the insurance companies won't be paying to rebuild. And yet, my knowledge, a little bit of the banking and loan system, is that you still owe the money. So those families are going to have to file for bankruptcy. Another thought, too, is hospitals. People with chemotherapy, they're being treated for cancer, but the hospital is destroyed and they can't get to the hospital for the treatment. It's just this tidal wave of nothing but sorrow and trouble. And so we need to pray. And I'm praying, we are waiting to find out how we as a church can help other churches. Right now, though, Jan Melton has not been able to get to us the names of others north because they don't have phone service. They don't have a way of communicating. So it's a bad time. Let's pray.